Now, I didn't plan a break for right now. We were going to just go ahead and move into the next speaker, who is Carrie Hays, and she's going to come up and talk about ACEs, Adverse Childhood Experience.
Good morning, everybody. Got your coffee and you're all settled in, and because I have a lot of numbers and stuff to go through. So I'm here to talk to you about that mysterious exposure that can lead many of us to chronic illness and death, early death actually. So I'm not talking about toxic packing materials or PFAS in your water, but I'm talking about adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs. How many of you have ever heard of ACEs? A few. That's probably because you've heard me talk about it. So I'm going to give you a little bit of background on ACEs. I first heard about ACEs at a conference in 2014. And at the time, I was working as an outpatient pediatric care coordinator, managing the care of critically and chronically ill kids. So this information about adverse childhood experiences was really life-changing for me and I felt for the kids that I was working with. The more I read about ACEs, the more I could see how they were working in the lives of my patients and their families. So let's just go back, and I'll give you a little background about ACEs and how they really came to the forefront. And the thing about this is that it's not what you think it is. It started in an obesity clinic for some reason. So in your folder, you should have a packet that looks like that. So this handsome man is Dr. Vincent Floody, and he was the head of the preventive medicine clinic at Kaiser Permanente, which is a really big insurance company. And the preventive medicine clinic was making great strides in diagnosing and treating illnesses and cutting healthcare costs before cutting healthcare costs was a thing. So the only fly in the ointment for Dr. Floody was that at the obesity clinic, he had a 50%, close to 50% dropout rate. And he couldn't understand why his clients were leaving the clinic when they were being successful at losing weight. It made no sense to him that his people who were 300, 400, 500 pounds overweight would lose 100 pounds and then drop out of the program when they were clearly making progress. As he took a closer look at the dropouts, he realized from their medical records, because he was just looking at medical records at first, that from their medical records, they were all born at a normal weight. He thought that they would gain weight slowly over the years, but that wasn't what happened. They gained weight abruptly, stabilized, and if they lost weight, then they would gain it all back, if not more, very quickly. So he actually began to interview some of his dropouts. He had a standard set of questions, and during one of his interviews, Dr. Floody misspoke. And he asked one of his patients, "How much did you weigh when you became sexually active?" Instead of, "How old were you when you became sexually active?" And the female patient answered, 40 pounds. Dr. Floody thought that she had misunderstood. So he misspoke the question again, and she answered 40 pounds, and it was with my father. So would later recall that he thought that was only the second case of incest he'd ever heard of in his 23-year practice. And he wasn't really sure what to do with that information at the time. He was like, oh. So what became even more disturbing for him was that he began to run into much of the same as he interviewed the other dropouts. In the end, most of the 286 patients that he interviewed admitted to being sexually abused as children. He was thinking, this can't be true. Somebody would have said something. They would have told me about this in medical school. As startling as this was, it turned out to be less significant than the other piece of the puzzle that dropped into place during an interview with a young woman who'd been sexually assaulted at the age of 23. She told Dr. Floody that in the year after the attack, she gained 105 pounds. The significant detail that many healthcare providers have not grasped yet, and many survivors know in their hearts, is that overweight people did not see their weight as a problem, but as a solution. Eating soothed their anxiety, fear, anger, or depression, bringing those down to tolerable levels. Just being obese made them invisible or less desirable to their attackers. So, over time, Dr. Floody shared this information with his colleagues. They listened politely, but then they accused him of being naive for believing what obviously these people had fabricated about their lives to cover up a failed life. Blaming the victim. So eventually, Dr. Floody met and joined forces with Dr. Bob Anda from the CDC, the Center for Disease Control. They began a several-year study and developed the first set of trauma-related questions. The study was run on 17,500 people who were willing to help understand childhood trauma, so they knew ahead of time what this was going to be like. In 1997, the results started to become available, and they had several surprises. The first being that they found a direct link between childhood trauma and adult onset of chronic diseases, as well as mental illness, doing time in prison, and work issues. The second surprise was that 2/3 of the adults in the study had experienced one or more ACE in their life. Of those, 87% had experienced 2 or more types of adverse childhood experiences. So they could look at ACEs and say, okay, these didn't really happen in isolation. For instance, if you had an adult in your household who was suffering from mental illness, you would probably also experience some physical or mental abuse of some kind. Lastly, the more adverse childhood experiences, the greater the risk of medical, mental, and social problems as an adult. So, in your packet, we have a list of the first ACE questionnaire that they had put together. So, it says finding your ACE score. So we're going to take a look at this questionnaire. And as we go through the questions, you are welcome to answer them for yourself. We're not going to share your answers in any way. This is just for your information. Okay? So, while you were growing up, during the first 18 years of your life, number 1, did a parent or other adult in the household often or very often swear at you, insult you, put you down, or humiliate you, or act in a way that made you feel afraid that you might be physically hurt. If that's you, put a 1 on the blank. Number 2, did a parent or other adult in the household often or very often push, grab, slap, or throw something at you, or ever hit you so hard that you had marks or were injured? If that's you, you get another 1. Number 3, did an adult or a person at least 5 years older than you ever touch or fondle you, or have you touch their body in a sexual way, or attempt or actually have oral, anal, or vaginal intercourse with you? If that's you, you get a 1. Number 4, did you often feel, or very often feel, that no one in your family loved you or thought you were important or special? Or your family didn't look out for each other, feel close to each other, or support each other? If that's you, you get another 1. 5, did you often or very often feel that you didn't have enough to eat, had to wear dirty clothes, or had no one to protect you, or if your parents were too drunk or high to take care of you or to take you to the doctor if you needed it? If that's you, you get another 1. Number 6, were your parents ever separated or divorced? If that's you, you get another 1. 7, was your mother or stepmother often or very often pushed, grabbed, slapped, or had something thrown at her? Or sometimes, often or very often, kicked, bitten, hit with a fist, or hit with something hard? Or ever repeatedly hit at least a few minutes or threatened with a knife or a gun? If that's you, you get another 1. Number 8, did you live with anyone who was a problem drinker or alcoholic who used street drugs? If that's you, you get another 1. Number 9, was a household member depressed or mentally ill, or did a household member attempt suicide? If that's you, you get another 1. And number 10, did a household member ever go to prison? If that's you, you get another 1. So you add up your ACE score as you just add up the columns of 1s. And the reason that they did there's my copy. So actually, let's just take a breath. Because some of you may have just found out that you have a very high ACE score. And that can be kind of scary. So I want to move on and just show you how the questionnaire broke down for this group of people that they were testing. And this is our types of ACEs. You have in your packet, you should have something that looks like this. And it kind of breaks down our categories of ACEs. So as you look at it, under abuse, we've got emotional abuse, sexual abuse, physical abuse. Under family dysfunction, we've got incarcerated relative, mother treated violently, mental illness, parental divorce, and substance abuse. And under neglect, we have physical and emotional. In the study, participants were given just 1 point for each category. It didn't really matter how many times that specific ACE had happened to them. They just were given 1 for each category. And as a healthcare provider, I just wanted to have you keep in mind that there are other factors that will add to your ACE burden, such as being female, being a minority, living in poverty, or having family members with high ACE scores. Now, another interesting thing from this study was the population that participated. So, we're going to move along to the next graphic. So, it says adverse childhood experiences. Looks like this. As we look at this graphic, you can see the breakdown of who participated in the study. This is a cross-section of middle America. These are people who had jobs and had insurance coverage, since it was an insurance company that ran the study. Of the 17,500 participants, more than 70% were Caucasian. Slightly more than half were women. The largest age group was over 60, and about 70% had some or a complete college education. So that's middle America right there. The study showed that ACEs were very common, with 36% of the population reporting 0 ACEs. Good for them. 26 reported 1, 16 reported 2, 9.5 reported 3, and 12.5 reported 4 or more. The population that's not represented in this study are the people who are living in poverty or didn't have access to health care. We can only imagine what their numbers would look like. So childhood trauma is an equal opportunity exposure no matter what your zip code is. This is a healthcare crisis that belongs to all of us. So let's see how these ACEs can affect us over the lifetime, over your lifespan. In your packet, you should have a lovely little graph like this. So now that you know the categories of the ACEs and how common they are and the cross-sections of Americans who participated in the study, what the numbers tell us from the study is that 1 in 6 adults have experienced 4 or more types of ACEs. At least 5 of the top 10 leading causes of death are associated with adverse childhood experiences. Preventing ACEs could actually reduce our health care, could reduce the number of adults with depression by as much as 44%, or up to 21 million cases. The study showed that things started to get serious around 4 or more ACEs. Compared to people with the 0 ACEs, the people with 4 or more had a 240% greater risk of hepatitis, a 390% were more likely to have COPD, which is chronic obstructive pulmonary disease like asthma, emphysema, chronic bronchitis, had a 240% chance higher risk of a sexually transmitted disease. They were twice as likely to be smokers, 12 times more likely to have attempted suicide, and 10 times more likely to have injected street drugs. People with high ACE scores are more likely to be violent, to have more marriages, have more broken bones, have more drug prescriptions, and people with 6 or more ACEs died nearly 20 years earlier on average than those without ACEs. Now that we know all that really cheerful news, let's look at our graph. We start at the bottom with adverse childhood experiences, and then it moves up to disrupted neurodevelopment, which we're going to talk about here in just a minute, which leads up to social, emotional, and cognitive impairment, which we'll also cover in a minute, and up to the disease, disability, and social problems. Then we look at the adoption of health risk behaviors. Now those are things like alcoholism, smoking, drugs, which eventually will lead to disease, disability, social problems, and early death. Another fact that came out in the study is that even if you didn't engage in any risky health behaviors, if you had an ACE score of 4 or more, you are still more likely to end up with a chronic illness, which is really not fair. So let's look at how that might happen. It's not my cat, Nick. I know you were thinking that because you've seen him. It looks a lot like my cat, but it's not my cat, Mr. Pickles. So what we're talking about is stress. And some stress in life is normal. It is even helpful for your health. But the type of stress that results when a child experiences ACEs may become toxic when there's a strong, frequent, or prolonged activation of the body's stress response system in the absence of the buffering protection of a supportive adult relationship. So that means that if you are going through the roughest patch ever, if you have someone who's there and supporting you, an adult that's keeping things on an even keel, you're going to do much better. Toxic stress is defined as stress that's sufficient to overcome the child's undeveloped coping mechanisms and lead to long-term impairment and illness. The biological response to this toxic stress can be incredibly destructive and may last a lifetime. So, how do we develop toxic stress? It has a lot to do with the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, which is your brain and your body's stress response system that governs your flight or fight response. So how does this work? Imagine that you're Dorothy and you're on your way to see the wizard and you're on the yellow brick road and you're singing about lions and tigers and bears. Oh my, lions and tigers and bears. When Dorothy does meet a lion, her hypothalamus sends a message to her pituitary, which sends a signal to her adrenal glands and says, release the stress hormones, send me adrenaline, send me cortisol. Dorothy's heart starts to pound, her pupils dilate, her airways open up, and she is ready to fight or run, which is great. If you're Dorothy and you're on the yellow brick road and there's a lion. But what if you're a young child and the lion comes home every night? And that stress response system is activated time and time and time again. At this point, it goes from being an adaptive or life-saving mechanism to maladaptive or health-damaging. Our little ones, whether it's us as children or our children and grandchildren, are extremely sensitive to the repeated stress activation because those brains and bodies are still developing. These high doses of adversity will affect brain structure and function, the developing immune system, the developing hormonal systems, and even the way our DNA is read and transcribed. Dun, dun, dun. Happily, we have some of these buffers. Just as we are biologically equipped with mechanisms to deal with threatening situations, our bodies are also equipped with neurochemicals like dopamine and GABA and serotonin that provide feelings of security and happiness and motivation. We can ourselves activate these positive feelings through self-care. So, an example is massage was shown to raise levels of cortisol and increase dopamine and serotonin. So there's really no magic here. If we present our body and our 5 senses with positive inputs like calming music, unprocessed foods, walks through nature, we can stimulate our own system to regulate in a favorable way. So here we sit with ACEs, and we're thinking, what can we do? There are things that you can do. Sleep, exercise, nutrition, mental health, meditation will all help enhance the process. It's going to take us a little bit longer as adults because there's a lot of science behind it, but we've trimmed a lot of our neural pathways so that it's going to take us probably 3 weeks to learn a new habit, if not more, and a new way of thinking. Kids are much easier at doing this than we are. Unfortunately, some of these interventions might not be sufficient. Active counseling, the use of cognitive behavioral therapy, and in some cases medications or other health interventions might be needed. If you have a high ACE score, it's my suggestion that you reveal this to your primary care provider. Take the information in your packet and show it to them. What you're looking for is a primary care provider who understands that you might need more in-depth care and is familiar with trauma-informed care. Please teach them to ask what happened to you, not what's wrong with you. Ask them if they are aware of trauma-informed care, which is basically an organizational structure and a framework that involves understanding, recognizing, and responding to the effects of all types of trauma. Trauma-informed care also emphasizes physical, psychological, and emotional safety for both the provider and the consumer, and helps survivors rebuild a sense of control and empowerment. Also, for parents, ask about parent-child psychotherapy, which works with both the parents and the children and helps children understand the ACEs that they've gone through.
Can you develop more ACEs as you get older too? Because it's not just in childhood. You can have a lot of stressors as you in your early adult or along the way that would contribute to this too?
I'm sure that you can, but in the definition of the ACEs, they stopped at 18.
Oh, okay.
But as people in general, we know that that can happen. There are things in life that can cause us a great amount of stress and trauma. So how is it that you can recognize if you're being affected by ACEs? You feel this way, underachieving, stuck in neutral, that you're capable of more? Everyone has moments when the handlebars of life are a little slippery. But do you feel like you're doomed to repeat your mistakes again and again? Or do you feel like you're lost in a thick brain fog and you're unable to reach any clarity in your life? It's possible that the trauma that you experienced in childhood could be the reason that you feel like you have one foot nailed to the floor and you're just walking in a circle. The connection that our researchers have made between childhood adversity and adult disease leaves many of us in a stressful place, having some anxiety or saying, yep, I have that disease and I have a high ACE score, so what do I do? Your body may have some of those answers, because a lot of times our bodies are shouting at us to do something on our behalf. Panic attacks, anxiety, and depression are common symptoms of the body saying, hey, I've been dealing with this trauma and this adversity since you were little. Please deal with it. Process it so I can release it and be healthy again. One of the reasons why negative stress from childhood gets stuck in our body is because the adversity is often too much for that little body and brain to process in the moments when it happens. The negative feelings or toxic stress of childhood adversity gets stuck in our bodies in a state-specific form that it originated in. So when we grow up, much of the memory might fade, or we block it out with statements such as, I got over it, it's in the past, there's nothing I can do about it today. But the fear, sadness, and other threatening feelings continue to live in the nervous system, growing and being triggered. And more importantly, what can you do about that today? The memory of the event is history, but the body may still be holding on to the feelings associated with the event. So the toxic stress can get triggered over and over again, and it builds toxicity within your body. The adverse stress continues to strengthen over time, and this direct link to your health will absolutely have an impact on your life today. Toxic stress will actually damage the cells in your body. A lot of times I've talked to people who've said that they got to a point in adulthood and they felt like they were trying to hold a beach ball underwater, and it just wouldn't stay there. It just popped right up, and they had to, it was in their face. They had to deal with it. So if you find yourself saying, I'm stupid, I'm ugly, I'm bad, or you often feel angry or worried or nervous or scared with no apparent reason for that, more often than not, this originated in childhood. So those statements like, get over it, it's in the past, or it's too painful to look at, put us in a position to tag current events that are happening today with those bad feelings from the past. And it brings just undesirable drama into our lives because we're being triggered by those things from the past. So the unprocessed, old disturbance in our nervous system feels very real when it's activated today. So we kick the dog, yell at our partner, and fight with our kids. Processing childhood adversity is not only crucial to your health and longevity, it is important to release this long-held negative stress in the body for happier, healthier relationships. Additionally, it's your story. It's not who you are, but ultimately what happened to you during a time when you had to depend on others for safety, connection, food, shelter, and love. Your brain may say, hot stove, don't touch. But we can look at adversity with curious eyes and a loving heart that says, hey, I made it through. The Apostle Paul understood this when he wrote in Romans 7:15 through 20. And this is from the Message, so it's kind of paraphrased. What I don't understand about myself is that I decide one way and then I act another. Doing things I absolutely despise. So if I can't be trusted to figure out what's best for myself and then do it, it becomes obvious that God's command is necessary. But I need something more. For I know the law, but still can't keep it. And if the power of sin within me keeps sabotaging my best intentions, I obviously need help. I realize that I don't have what it takes. I can will it, but I can't do it. I decided to do good, but I don't really do it. I decide not to do bad, but then I do it anyway. My decisions, such as they are, don't result in actions. Something's gone wrong deep within me and gets the better of me every time. So this is a really old story. Paul knew all about it. And I wanted to give you a chance to hear from some young men that have been through childhood trauma, that they are immersed in a program to help reduce the effects and help them heal. This is just one of the ways communities can help reduce the impact of ACEs. We can also change how people think about the causes of ACEs. Let's shift the focus from just individual responsibility to community solutions. We can reduce the stigma around seeking help with parenting challenges or for substance misuse, depression, or suicidal thoughts. And we can promote safe, stable, nurturing relationships and environments where children live, learn, and play. So I can give you a quick synopsis of what happened to these kids. These boys all talk about how they had parents who died. They went through years of not having enough to eat, moving from place to place, their parents being involved in drugs, and they talked about which ACEs they had. They all have ACE cards that had their ACEs on them, and then afterwards they talked about how learning responsibility and relearning how to be to believe that they would be cared for and learning how to trust people really made a difference in their lives. My personal take on this is that the sooner you get to kids with ACEs, the easier you can, the quicker and faster they can heal. So we'll move on from here since we don't have that. When I was working as an ER nurse years ago, I remember thinking to myself, some of my patients really didn't need to be there. They just needed to learn a few life hacks, like how to use a thermometer or how to give their kids Tylenol. I joked that we could set up a grandma in one of the exam rooms with a pot of tea, and she could dispense wisdom as needed. It's one of the reasons I went back to get my master's in family studies. If we fast forward to 2014 and learning about ACEs, not only did I find answers for my family, for my families at work, but I found answers for myself. And I thought that when I brought this ACE information back to my providers, that they would be really excited, they would want to incorporate it, and into our standard of care. Well, one of the first things they talked about when they saw that ACE questionnaire that you all answered was they were like, no, our patients, they're not going to answer this. These questions are invasive. These people don't want to talk about their parenting. Well, we're struggling to find a way forward, and it should include recognizing the challenges that young families face and offering support and encouragement to reduce toxic stress in the lives of children. We need to, hopefully, we can learn to use effective social and economic supports that address financial hardships and other conditions that put families at risk for ACEs. There's so many strengths and limitations in modern medicine and public health when it comes to addressing and preventing ACEs. Interrupting the cycle of abuse and neglect must first begin with adults. It will require an integrative and multi-generational approach that empowers individuals to heal their bodies, their minds, and their spirits. I realize there's no quick fixes, And ACEs appear to be an overwhelming problem, one that people find hard to face. It's like I said, nobody wants to have their parenting criticized. I realized that the United States has a really good track record in addressing public health issues. We learned how to use seatbelts, click it or ticket. And the Surgeon General told us that cigarettes cause cancer. And we will learn that childhood trauma can lead to lifelong consequences. Please join me in spreading the word about adverse childhood experiences. Thank you.
My question is, in the questionnaire you handed out, that death of a parent or absence of a parent wasn't directly mentioned as an ACEs factor, and I wonder if that was considered or not, or is assumed to be counted as a separation.
I think they did consider it a separation. I think they did. Like I said, this questionnaire was the original that they started with in the 1990s. So that's how long the study has been around. And it has been changed over the years. The ACEs studies have continued to go on in different states. The states have taken it on themselves. I know that in Michigan, they're doing ACE studies also. But things have changed over the years, but this was the original that they used, and it covers a lot of it.
So your thoughts and opinions and from the ACE scores. So, 4 and more, you experience more problems. But is there rare cases when it's like 1, 2, or 3, where you get like early death and all these on the pyramid?
I think it really kind of depends, Nick. The thing that my research has shown me is that there are, as a nurse, they would always you had to ask your patients, on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being the worst, how much pain you're in right now. And I think that distress scale also works with that, because pain is what you say it is, your distress is what you say it is too. So that makes a big difference for people. And also, there is some science in the fact that Rohan was talking about telomeres. Telomeres are like the little bumpers on the end of your DNA. And if you have short bumpers, you might have more problems dealing with it, because as the adversity beats you up, then those shortened telomeres, you may have more problems. That's why, you can have 2 kids from one family where there's been a lot of ACEs. One does great, and the other one's in jail for being a serial killer.
First of all, Carrie, I want to thank you for bringing this to our attention, because I have struggled with this and I get frustrated. And what I'm hearing you're saying is whatever trauma that a child's been through have all these issues, pretty much. Am I correct on that?
Well, once again, it kind of depends on the kid. But if you have a kid that has, an ADHD diagnosis, has been in and out of the CPS system, and is doing those kinds of things, and it has behavioral problems, and then you're going to see that there are probably a lot of ACEs in their life. But fortunately, those things can be healed. The sooner you find that out, and my push is that they need to do this screening for everyone, every kid.
Okay, thank you.
I noticed the ACEs, I know you said it's from the 90s, it focused a lot on physical abuse and that kind of thing, sexual abuse, but one of the things, I grew up in a family where there was a lot of verbal abuse, it was so common and with the whole family where they go in a shame spiral and then they would just vomit verbally over everybody with no care at all on the impact it had on other people. And I just feel that is just such a, for me, it's such a trigger. And I just wonder why the ACEs didn't cover that, because to me that seems very abusive.
Well, they did, in their original one, they did have physical and verbal abuse. So I would consider that verbal abuse. And it's extremely damaging, especially the one you're talking about, which is shaming. Shaming is just very damaging to small children.
Is there such a thing as a protective mode that a child might go into to suppress an event that did happen in their life that could only be brought back subconsciously?
Yes, so true. I really believe that, your bodies go into that protective mode when you're very young, and a lot of times they forget. They forget on purpose, or subconsciously they forget, or it morphs into something different that's not as scary for them. And that's when, remember I said about the beach ball that you're trying to push under the water? That is usually what happens to those kids. As they go into adulthood, then all of a sudden, they have a complete breakdown, and they're like, what the heck just happened? I had one lady tell me that she started having breathing difficulties, and she thought that she developed asthma or something. Turned out she was having panic attacks, and it unleashed a lot of what was going on and what happened to her as a kid. So yeah, that's very true.
How do you find a facility or a physician that has experience in dealing with ACEs? And is it through an internal medicine doctor, or do you have to look for a psychiatrist that would be able to help?
That's such a hard question. When I was working in the clinics, I was like, there's no way to send kids to get any psychotherapy help. There just weren't enough providers. But all physicians, if you take the information into them and say, hey, I want you to understand, because I did this for my doc. I took stuff into her and said, hey, my ACE score is about a 4. So let's kind of look at my healthcare that direction. And she was like, I've never heard of this before.
Right.
So, I gave her the information. She's got the ACE study and I also have a resource page. I don't know whether it's in your packet or not, but I have a resource page of books you can read and ways that you can start being the scientist of yourself, because each one of us is different and we're going to need different care. But yes, you need care across the board. You need a counselor. You might need a psychiatrist, because psychiatrists are the people who hand out medications. And I'm sure that some of the other people who are going to come and talk are going to tell you a lot of the same things. Or be able to give you more information on that than I can, because I just dealt with this a lot with kids and just myself as an adult. So, but the information, one of the books that I find the best is The Deepest Well, which is on the resource page, because she gives you from A to Z kind of what to deal with. But unfortunately in Kalamazoo, at this point, you're going to have to do the educating of your providers.
What about outside of Kalamazoo? Anywhere? Is there any facility or doctors that are...
There are some, yes. Yes, but you may have to end up in Grand Rapids or Ann Arbor. And things may have changed for adults. I think that they're starting to push this trauma-informed care. We see trauma-informed care a lot. It's a big buzzword. Or, trauma-based care. So things are starting to change, but it's going to have to be kind of a grassroots effort, I think. Has to be a movement.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, so that's all the questions that we have time for now. So maybe you could ask,
Okay.
during the break, you could ask her privately.
So we're going to go ahead and take a break, get up, stretch your legs. The restrooms are out these doors.